8378 reminds us how it's disliked to be lazy in the worldly things. For those who are lazy in the worldly things are lazy in the things that pertain to the hereafter. 8397 talks about the year's saving of foodstuff that, brings comfort thereof. And I was raised LDS, and in that church, we were recommended to get a year's saving of food, or work towards that. 8413 reminds us to seek refuge with God, with the, from the increasing of dominating men, from single women, and from the debt. 8439 reminds us that the person who borrows without intending to put it back is a thief. 8486 says that you shouldn't be a arms dealer on, two sides of a wrongful dispute, but you can sell them protective gear. 8491, someone came to Abdullah and asked about his son, and was recommended that he doesn't get into the business of selling coffins, of hoarding, of slave trading, money changing, or butchery. 8517 reminds us not to get paid for Quran. We can get paid for our work, we can get paid for the materials or the art, but don't accept additional payment for it being Quran. 8538 reminds us that it's not lawful to knowingly take part in the, the acquiring of unlawfully obtained goods. Now, if you inherit from somebody who's sinned or something like that, that's different. But I mean, like somebody robs, and this is stolen stuff, and you're, saying, oh, that's a good deal. No, stay away from that. 8606 reminds us that there is no harm in being the owner or, benefiting from the land in which Zoroastrians have their temples, or otherwise take care of their animals and their business there. 8631 reminds us that when we quit business, it allows the failing of the reason. 8677 warns about the Yazidi, and they have intermingled with the jinn. I've talked in the Satan and Satanism playlist about groups that their goal is to become Nexions for the Shayateen mental jinn, and the Yazidi are an ancient tribe that has kept that up. And so, a person's to avoid business with them or other. Okay, 8709 talks about the hoarded goods. That if it comes to be that the only food left is of such an individual that has hoarded up goods, they're supposed to take it out and, they can sell it, but they're not supposed to sit on a hoard of food and let the people around them starve to death. We have narrations that a person doesn't hoard for the purpose of driving the prices up elsewhere. 8831 reminds us that we are not to stand with stipulations that disagree with the Book of God. In this era, the international age, this is Al-Quran. And, neither you nor the group should engage in such things. 8832 talks about how, in favor of the buyer, if there's a defect noticed in an animal or something, it's in their favor if it's noticed within a few days to return. And the following confirms that. 8834 bring up the absolute right. As long as they're inside of each other and, like maybe you take it out into the light, that sort of thing, then you have the, then the right remains to return. And the next few narrations confirm on that line. And, also in regards to the individual who hasn't, but you don't, if it's not lawful for you to touch or otherwise use the animal until you've bought it, that's part of the reason for the 3 days or the goods or whatever. And you also have the business deal arranged, but the payment's not made, but the person's still around, they can cancel it. 8855. Delayed payment is lawful in terms of capital plus profit, but not capital plus time or fixed price regardless of capital. 8884 again talks about the delayed payback. But like, for example, here's a good that's really worth this, but if you pay over time, then you can pay this. As long as you're not paying an interest payment, that is an acceptable commerce. 8919 regards the sale of a slave. And if you consummated the marriage with the slave, then the difference in the price in terms of defective versus non-defective that you bought not knowing, then that should be refunded. 8900 and without the intercourse, similar things might be said in some of the animal transactions or other goods transactions. 8928 to 8930 talks about the year's events: insanity, leprosy, bars, a defect that prevents intercourse, that sort of thing. And of course, when it comes to a human, the arranging of marriage in any case, you end up, it's not you try out the woman for a year, then you get to return the dowry. No, that's not how it works. 8935 reminds us that it's not lawful to separate a woman and her children or siblings among the slaves unless they agree to it. 8971 reminds us that there's no fault in the one who sells materials to be used for musical instruments. Then we have an indication that we can it's not unlawful to sell animal dung, and then another narration about how the predatory animals, one can have business regarding that. Then we have a narration regarding those who make crosses or idols, and you can say amulets and charms. Different than a talisman. A talisman is, it doesn't have the power in itself. It has, it's a spiritually used object. But the crosses and the idols and graven images aside, if you know that such and such is going to be towards that, then it's not lawful for you to be on that part of the business. Then you have a narration indicating that if somebody transports pigs or alcohol on your vessel, and you know that it's going to happen as well, it's permissible for you to rent out transport to such individuals. But then we have a narration where a person doesn't take part in the sale of monkeys. And we close with a narration. We don't close with a narration, but 8978 talks about how we should not, rent out our place to people who are going to do business with, certain sins. And, that regards, specifically in that narration, we have about the intoxicants. And then we get into some stuff about how, so the dead animal is not lawful, but if a skin of something is found and it's tanned and, it's been treated, then it becomes usable. 9003 forbids the down payment unless it's part of the price. No down payment, and then you pay, like with the mortgages, with the interest and stuff, we don't take part in that. 9184 points out that you can rent a portion of what you're renting, but the price has to be less than what you're renting it for yourself. 9218 reminds us that abandoned properties, there's more right on the person who restores them. A person, not someone goes on vacation or someone has a winter or summer house and they visit one and then the other, they have to be abandoned longer than that or something, right? But there's also, there is a death tax. A person should pay a tax to, in regards to their inheritance, which is apparently not as defined, but it's a tax that does not take from one's basic food or, living or caring for the place expenses. 9200 and and you can make a servant or a slave or something to inherit. It's not required to give them a portion, but it's permissible. 9257 teaches us that we should make it known what a person's going to be hired for, and if a person keeps somebody from something lawful because of their hire, then the blame is on them. Like if they keep them from attending the Friday service as an employee. 9287 has a similar rule to, in this state, that if a land's been abandoned for 10 years, then, they cease to hold rights over it. Like you don't even step on a piece of property for 10 years, that's that sort of thing. But a few years, a person should have a good reason to, not be working, not making use of their land. 9308 regards a slave or a servant, that if they've been authorized to make a use of property or to make a payment or that sort of thing, then they, then they're not responsible for the losses or whatever that occurs from that. But if they're not, then then they can work to pay off their debt. There's provision elsewhere about the wife. If the wife isn't having her needs taken care of, or the children or something, then they can take from the and not occur the sin of theft or something. But again, it's needs, not wants. People have a lot of wants. 9368 regards the increasing good for your belief through increasing in your love for women. 9375 is something that's probably better known through the Sunnis relating it, but Prophet Muhammad said that he found his delight of his eyes and such in the ritual prayers, in women, and in Al-Hassan and Hussein. And this is pointed out also the goodly children, for one's relatives. 9383, much like in the Celtic tradition, we have, there's certain qualities that make for a good wife. And these qualities, of course, are chastity, openness to the husband, which does not interfere with chastity. I'm sorry, those raised in a Christian thing, that's not what the word means. And obeying of the good and lawful, the orders. Then we have a narration about the importance of shyness, and then we have a narration about the goodness of a woman filled with carnal lusts. That is, of course, chaste. And then we have a narration about the goodness of a woman with a beautiful face, and the goodness of a woman who doesn't ask much for her dowry. Oh, I'm sorry about that. Then we have a narration about a woman who, the goodness of a woman who protects her husband from anger, and the goodness of a woman who protects her husband's interest when he's not around. Then we have a narration that mentions smelling nice, being good at food preparation, and one that is careful with spending. And then that's confirmed in a different way in the next. But 9390 is the worst women are spiteful, that, live for flattery, it's not dignified, don't have children. I mean, sometimes that's not their fault. They roam around and show off and are, vulgar. And she doesn't listen, and she doesn't obey in what's good. But she doesn't accept excuses either, or forgive. And of course, she doesn't, she's not open to his desires. And the 9391 talks about, a dirty woman is, not good. Someone encouraging the carnality of others. And 9392, there's a supplication that regards the, protection from a woman that makes one old. And of course, a woman can say a similar supplication. And, some tribes, like the Quraysh, those women were compassionate to their children and good for their husbands. So, those are qualities that a person should pass on. We have 9403, which reminds us that being married can multiply the reward of a 2 rakat prayer, 2 bows prayer, more than 70 times. The next narration mentions how marriage is securing of half of one's faith, the other half being the other elements of piety. Then we have a narration about the worthless dead being the unmarried, but people who bring unmarried on principle, not that they can't find a good spouse or they somehow don't otherwise find the means. But remember, the legacy is one of those 3 things that go on. And your memory, people stop saying your memory if you don't have children and stuff like this. Children helps preserve one's memory. The memory of oneself. And even if you're old, it's encouraged to marry. Like, if the woman dies first, the man should remarry, if he can, because it's good to populate the earth with children. Overpopulation, it's a redistribution thing. California alone, if it switched to halal eating, 21, just in regard to the animals, not even the alcohol thing, 21 billion people, it's estimated, could be fed out of California alone. 9407 reminds us that the tradition of Muhammad is marriage. So if we're going to follow the tradition of Muhammad, the Nabi, then we should seek to get married. 9408 reminds us that having a spouse can lead to a person having more sustenance in, one way or another. And it can be more preferable to have a spouse than to have the world. You don't own people, that sort of thing, but you know what I mean. Then we have, if a person's not married, but there's mothers of their children that they're providing for, and they're providing for their children, because that's the longer term thing, then, they're not as unmarried such that, they're not having a lasting benefit when they die or something like that. Or they may have excuse not to get married, in other words. 9410 reminds us to trust in God. Don't avoid a marriage because you think you can't feed your family in the future. And the next narration relates how an individual got means after getting married. The next narration regards that you can seek the help of the religious authority of the area in that regard. It refers to Prophet Muhammad in that respect. And the one after that doesn't mention that Muhammad helped the individual to get married, but it mentions that he was recommended to, hey, you should get married. If you have a spouse and children, then that can help you, to figure out how to acquire sustenance for them. And the next is one that elaborates on 24:32, and then one that, in addition to that, relates to 429, and then one that relates to 24:33. 9417 regards how the best intercession and mediation, sorry for the burp there, tends to be marriage. Then is, how God will look upon the person who helps arrange a marriage. Arrange a marriage for the couple, don't arrange it for yourself, basically. Then there's a narration that reminds us that the dower of a good woman, nothing can match of that. And the dower for a bad woman, well, they're not even worth, picking up dirt. 94:20 reminds us of the good in the maternal uncles as associates. 94:21 reminds us, to be careful of the match and the situation in which the matches occur, in terms of the marriages. Then we're reminded how one day the prophet of God stood up and warned the people in a sermon against the green plant that grows on a dump site. And, that's likened to a beautiful woman who grew up under evil circumstances. Now, certain people can step aside with that. That's what puberty is about, independent morality, ability to choose one's own moral actions. 9423 regards how a person should marry a spouse that is religious beyond some questions. There was a Jewish woman that I knew. She could talk religion, but when it came down to practicing it, if it interfered with her desires, not really. It seemed that maybe she'd, keep to one guy, but, certain context and some other things in that respect, you couldn't. Anyways. So yeah, religion's just got to be more than saying stuff. 9424 reminds us that we can marry for wealth. Other narrations indicate that you can marry for their good looks or their status, but you do have to preserve your religion in a marriage. That's got to be considered. Oh, the very next narration, the beauty or, physical prowess or whatever, however that could be phrased, I think might apply to what's being said there. But marry them for their religion. And then we're reminded in the narration that some ugliness is, good per se if you think that it's going to result in more children. And then we're reminded to not marry somebody who's super good looking that you think is sterile. Or nowadays it's not so much sterile, but they're on a medication that's going to cause birth defects or something. 9428 is al-su'a, a woman with some ugliness, but it appears that it seems like she might be able to have a lot of children. Then, that's a good choice in terms of the physical. And then, 9429 reminds us about, the children how the children, if they're raised right, you have a lot of children, so they'll pray in one way or another for your forgiveness on the end day. 9454 reminds that women exceed in enjoyment, like they have 99 parts above men, but they also exceed in natural shyness. So definitely don't break the shyness of a woman. Sorry, Aleister Crowley, but yeah, don't kill their heart or that sort of thing. 9463 talks of how Kulthum's marriage after was, forced. And, of course, in the Islamic vision, forced marriage is not allowed at all. 9469 talks about how if you allowed marriage with one of your relatives to somebody who is an intoxicant user, then you've failed in terms of what you should be doing as a relative. 9472 and 9476 regards that you can marry a skeptic, but you shouldn't, bring about others to marry a skeptic, particularly because a woman, even more than a man, tends to follow into the faith of the spouse. But there's implication, but certainly an open hypocrite, that's something to completely stay away from. 9497, 9497 warns us not to marry those who don't, use their intelligence right. Or maybe don't even have those intelligence because they're a tragedy to their spouse and their children. 9509 points out that if a person commits an unlawful sexual act with someone, then they can marry them before any waiting period or something. But they should ascertain that they have repented. And the next narration says that you can marry, people. A man can marry people of the book, but the Christians and the Jews and stuff, you stop them that you have married from from consuming the intoxicants or the unlawful food otherwise.